There's a very clear difference between Bitcoin and a lot of these other coins out there. And we got to make sure that Bitcoin is in the strategic reserve. And we have to show not just the politicians, like I said, but also these crypto lobbyists and crypto companies why it is so critical that Bitcoin be the cornerstone of this reserve.
Hey everybody, this episode of Supply Shock is powered by Core. You're going to hear a lot more about them later in this episode, but first, a word from our sponsors.
Core is the Bitcoin consumer chain. Stake your Bitcoin, explore Bitcoin DeFi, and earn rewards today. Visit stake.coredao.org/blockworks. You'll hear more about them later in the episode.
Crypto's premier institutional conference is coming to New York City, March 18th to the 20th. That's right, I'm talking about Digital Asset Summit, presented by Blockworks. Of course, I'll be there bringing a Bitcoin maximalist perspective to a number of talks and panels where I'll be discussing why Bitcoin might be headed to $1 million. And, well, the rest of the digital asset market just might be trending to zero. Get your tickets online today. They're selling fast. The United States could buy over $20 billion in Bitcoin, at least if this man has his say. Welcome to Supply Shock. I'm your host, Pete Rizzo, the Bitcoin historian on X. Our guest here today is president and co-founder of Satoshi Action Fund, Dennis Porter. You know him for his big breaking news deliveries on X. He's also a key figure behind the over 30 states that have filed for their own strategic Bitcoin reserves. That's right, U.S. states buying Bitcoin. Of course, 6 efforts so far have failed. We'll dig into all the specifics. But first, I want to talk about the news of the moment. Donald J. Trump announcing this weekend a strategic crypto reserve. It will feature 5 assets, including Bitcoin, though Bitcoin was added a bit as an addendum. So, Dennis, curious to get your thoughts on this announcement and Donald Trump's strategy here. Does this make you think that Donald Trump is serious about buying Bitcoin as president of the United States?
I think it does. But before we get too far into the Trump conversation, I got to say, man, you got right away, you're going to bring up the 6 bills that have failed. I mean, aren't you supposed to be on team Bitcoin? This feels like I'm already at the fake news, hostile, media source over here, right?
Laying out the facts.
Supply Shock is like clearly taking a side in this debate. Right. So we're glad to know where you stand on the side of history, though, Rizzo. That's good. That's good to know. So excited about the announcement. As a Bitcoiner, I certainly believe that we need a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I am on the side of let's just do Bitcoin. I mean, that's going to be my preference. I wouldn't call myself an ultra Bitcoin maxi, but Bitcoin is the only thing I hold. I like things like stablecoins. So I'm a non-traditional Bitcoiner. And I do see also really clearly the political landscape. I mean, we're sitting in this environment right now where the crypto industry has spent hundreds of millions of dollars. In fact, it was funny because just a couple years ago, I was telling everybody, like, if you want a seat at the table, you're going to have to spend more money. And I'm not necessarily a big money in politics guy. In fact, I'm pretty strongly against the amount of money that can be spent. But at the end of the day, this is a system that we currently live in. If you want a seat at the table, you got to spend more money. In the last election cycle, the amount of money the crypto industry spent has changed radically. So we went from being one of the smallest spenders in the entire political space to the largest spender by far and away. I mean, if you look at this election cycle, we spent more than everyone. We spent more than the military industrial complex. We spent more than healthcare. We spent more than the oil and gas industry. I mean, we are the biggest spender. And the wildest part about it is if you go back 10 years, we're still beating them over the 10-year period, even though we only really spent a lot in this last 2 years, in this last election. So it's an incredible amount of money that's coming in from the crypto lobby, which, in some ways that does benefit the Bitcoin industry. But it's clear that they've been able to have conversations around strategic reserves, and they have made the pitch, probably done a pretty good job of it, that they should have also other assets within that reserve. I think that at the end of the day, it's going to be very difficult to convince the Trump administration to say it's only going to be Bitcoin. They've clearly made it known that they want all these other assets in there. Our objective now must be, as Bitcoiners, we have to make sure that as much Bitcoin as possible is in that reserve, and that we make sure that Bitcoin even makes it in. Because as you saw, the first tweet, it didn't even include Bitcoin. This is one argument I make a lot to people, and I get beat up a lot for it. I always want to be the Bitcoiner in the room. Crypto's got the money to lobby. There's no CEO, executive, or lobbying budget in Bitcoin because it's a bottom-up community. And so what I've said for many years now is I said, sometimes politics makes interesting bedfellows, and you can't just go rage against the machine. You want to be on Twitter, you want to scream into the void. I used to do the same. I don't blame you. I'm on your team when it comes to Bitcoin, and I think there should only be Bitcoin. But at the end of the day, you have to achieve consensus with the industry that you're with. And now it's our job as Bitcoiners to go put ourselves in the room where there's crypto people. And you know what? For a while, when I was put in the crypto room, there was no other Bitcoiners there, literally no one. I was the only Bitcoiner in the room having these conversations. No one even understood Bitcoin at all, especially politically. It was all about crypto all the time, as you well know. It took me just a whole year just to convince them that Bitcoin mining wasn't like this horrible thing. Even like some of the crypto lobbyists were like, we don't need Bitcoin mining. It's not good. It's bad for the environment. They were saying that to the lawmakers. A lot of the work we did changed that tune and enabled those crypto lobbyists to start saying good things about Bitcoin mining. And I think the same thing can happen with a strategic Bitcoin reserve. We have to convince not only the politicians, we have to convince the lobbyists and the crypto companies why Bitcoin really is best suited to be in the strategic Bitcoin reserve. And we understand why they would prefer proof of stake over proof of work, because that's what they have, or why they would prefer Ripple over Bitcoin being in the reserve. But there's a very clear difference between Bitcoin and a lot of these other coins out there. And we got to make sure that Bitcoin is in the strategic reserve. And we have to show not just the politicians, like I said, but also these crypto lobbyists and crypto companies why it is so critical that Bitcoin be the cornerstone of this reserve.
Two-part question follow-up. I think you answered it a little bit, but want to nail it down just to get your thoughts. So is this strategic digital asset reserve happening 100%? And is Bitcoin guaranteed to be included? Sounds like you think no.
I don't think either of those things are 100%. Certainly, I think there's a very high chance if it does happen that Bitcoin will be in there. But again, it was an afterthought. It was the second tweet. It was like a follow-up conversation. So we really need to be taking that very seriously and recognizing that, a lot of Bitcoiners are like, Bitcoin should be the only thing in this reserve. Nothing else should be in it. I think you should be more worried about whether Bitcoin will be in it at all. So these conversations need to be had. We need to be talking to lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, why Bitcoin truly matters and why it's really should be the cornerstone of the strategic Bitcoin, or the strategic crypto reserve, I should say. The other question was, is it a guarantee that's going to happen? Nothing is a guarantee. Nothing. No policy ever. I've never said any policy ever is a guarantee. You can get to 99%, but you can never do 100% guarantee on policy. It's just not possible because anything can happen. We've had policies that we thought, no way anyone's going to get in the way of this policy. Everything is great. All sunshine and roses, rainbows everywhere. And then at the last minute, some critical participant in the process starts to voice concerns and the whole thing falls apart. That can happen at any moment, at any time, for any reason. And oftentimes it's hard to know why. So we have to be always thinking optimistically, but be prepared for the worst. Plan, be hopeful, but plan for the worst case scenario. And that's why it's super important that we get as many Bitcoiners as possible to participate in these conversations, and also to be having the conversation with the crypto lobbyists and the politicians on why we need to continue to drive this policy forward. I mean, if you look, I think I deleted the tweet, but I just wanted to quickly flash it up there on my account. I said that look at the chart of Bitcoin price action and look at the probability of a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and they match almost perfectly. So in a way, this market is really it could possibly be being propped up just purely by the idea of a strategic Bitcoin reserve. So if you want Bitcoin to go up in price, if you want the market to be successful, maybe you don't, maybe you want cheap Bitcoin. But if you do want the market to go up, certainly you should be getting behind this idea and pushing it as hard as you can to make sure it gets across the finish line.
Let's talk about the reaction and sort of the, bipartisan nature of it. It does seem like many CEOs at this point have come out and said they think that it should be Bitcoin or nothing. Brian Armstrong, CEO of Coinbase, coming out and saying that. Cameron Winklevoss, co-founder of Gemini, effectively saying the same thing. Do you think there was a strategy here to maybe propose something that was extreme and then essentially maybe walk it back towards something like a strategic Bitcoin reserve? Because that seems to be a popular sort of Twitter commentary at the moment, that this is all sort of part of Trump's plan, that this is just, he leads with something ridiculous, he walks it back. Do you see that there could be something to that theory? I mean,
certainly Trump is willing to pivot. I mean, he's probably willing to pivot faster than anyone when he sees where the right direction is to go politically. He's probably one of the most politically savvy presidents that we've had in our lifetime when it comes to the willingness to just go wherever the water is flowing, so to speak, where the political waters are going to carry him. That being said, I don't always just assume that everything single move he does is like 5D chess. I think it's much more of a Steve Bannon type of approach, where it is the rush in, try to push as much as you can against the wall as possible, as quickly as possible. He calls it muzzle velocity. They want to fill the void as quickly as possible with many ideas as they possibly can, and they want to really full court press the political system to see what sticks and what doesn't stick. So I think that's probably more likely here, and that is what has enabled Trump to be successful in the past. But given the new administration and with all the people that are on his team that are much more in alignment with him compared to his last administration, I tend to believe that is the approach they're taking now. We also have to keep it in consideration that some of the largest donors to the Trump administration, as well as people within the Trump family themselves, are supportive of this idea of allowing other assets to be inside of the reserve. You have the Ripple folks who clearly have made a pitch, who are pushing, and they're spending a lot of money politically. So that's a big part of everything that's happening right now. And to your argument that it could be just, hey, this is just a negotiation tactic. It could even be a negotiation tactic by Ripple. I don't know. Maybe they're saying, we're going to push on this because when it comes for market structure, we can sort of pull back here on something that's less important to us and lean into something that's more important to us. I mean, we see this happen all the time. When we were fighting against SB 1751 in Texas, it was a bill that would essentially have almost eliminated the ability for Bitcoin miners to participate in grid balancing. And there was also a tax component in the bill for property taxes, property tax abatements. And when we were fighting hard to get it done, at the end of the day, they were like, you know what, we'll give up the tax component because actually we really care about kicking you guys out of these grid balancing programs. Same thing could be happening here with Ripple. Hard to know. I try not to question people's motives. It's very difficult to question people's motives. But at the end of the day, it's so important that we continue to show and advocate for why. And I told Jack Mallers this, in New York City. I said, thank you so much for championing and fighting out there. Keep making the case. It's my job to be the Bitcoiner in the room, making the case, but I can't be, flipping the bird to these people. I have to actually engage professionally, but keep making the case for why Bitcoin. I tell it to Bitcoiners, keep making the case for why Bitcoin should be in the reserve, why it should be the only thing in the reserve. That makes my job easier, and it makes the job easier for anyone else in Washington, D.C. that does want to see Bitcoin be the cornerstone of this reserve.
HODLing isn't enough anymore. Bitcoin is evolving on Core, unlocking yield, utility, and a thriving DeFi ecosystem. With over 250 dApps and nearly $1 billion in total value locked, Bitcoin DeFi is growing fast. Hundreds of thousands of users are already staking, lending, and building on Core's high-speed, low-fee rails. Now it's your turn. Whether you're a user or a builder, the Core Ignition program rewards you for participating in Bitcoin's next evolution. Unlock your Bitcoin and use Core. Start earning with Ignition today at ignition.coredao.org/blockworks. For the past decade, Ledger has been the global leader in digital asset security, trusted to secure more than 20% of the world's crypto assets. Celebrating 10 years of innovation, Ledger is making digital ownership more secure and accessible with their latest products, Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex. These wallets feature the world's first secure touchscreens, simplifying your digital transactions while ensuring uncompromising security through Ledger's secure chip and proprietary OS. Plus, with the Ledger Security Key app, you can say goodbye to traditional passwords and step up your digital protection. Ready to protect your assets? Choose the most trusted name in hardware wallets, Ledger, and take control of your digital security today at ledger.com. Unlock the power of your Bitcoin with Ledn. For over 6 years, Ledn has helped thousands HODL their Bitcoin while accessing liquidity, focusing on transparency, security, and trust. Learn what your Bitcoin can do for you and see why so many clients trust Ledn. Visit ledn.io to learn more.
Let's talk about the case against ADA, XRP, Sol. We know that these are cryptocurrencies that, were started by founders, have heavy concentrations where, in some cases, a single owner, or multiple owners who are part of the founding team have a majority of the supply. How do you make that case against, if you are talking to the Trump administration and pushing a Bitcoin-only reserve, what is the case against these assets?
I won't single out one asset in particular, but we'll really just compare Bitcoin to the broader crypto industry. And at the end of the day, 99.9% of crypto, these are platforms. These are places where you would want to, and maybe some of it will come to Bitcoin one day, but If you're an ossification person, you probably don't believe that any of that's going to happen in the Bitcoin space. So some of these things are going to survive outside of Bitcoin. Stablecoins could be one. DAOs is something certainly that people have been very interested in smart contracts. These things all operate on top of these platforms. And these are really crypto companies. These are platforms that enable these technologies and these utilities to be able to function properly. And there's a race to the bottom to ensure that the price to participate or to have these smart contracts, games, you name it, stablecoins on those platforms, it's a race to the bottom to provide those services, which means that they want to get it to be cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. When you drive things to be cheaper and cheaper and cheaper in the crypto space, you drive away decentralization. And as you drive decentralization away, you increase the odds that the people who are controlling those platforms, very much like controlling a company, can do what? At any time, they can change the protocol, which means that at any time they could increase or decrease the supply. So just from a financial perspective, I don't go as far as to say it's a national security interest if we have Ripple or whatever else in this reserve. I think it's just a financial problem. It's a financial problem. Does it make sense to invest our money in an asset that at any point a crypto company, once sufficiently no longer decentralized, can manipulate the price and dilute the amount of the current supply? So look at a lot of these companies out there already. Some of them have already done it. And some of them are moving further and further away from decentralization because decentralization doesn't make sense for everything. Decentralization is a tool to protect the world's most important things. Money is one of the most important things that we can protect with decentralization. I would say voting kind of makes sense at one point if we can figure out a way to decentralize the voting platform, so to provide transparency and auditability. I think that cost makes sense to show that our votes actually matter and do count, and we can verify them. Same thing with money. I don't think it makes sense for gaming. I don't think it makes sense to brutally decentralize a platform so that people can have their game decentralized so that if the game console shuts down, they can take their item from one game to the next. I get why you would want to do it. I just don't think you need to ruthlessly defend it with decentralization. Enable that through these platforms, but making it so it's impossible for those items to go away because you've so ruthlessly decentralized your platform doesn't make any sense to me. I don't think it makes sense similarly with other types of utilities that operate or want to operate on top of these crypto platforms. So the argument really is, do you want to invest in an asset that is trending towards an environment where it can be manipulated? That maybe you do. Look at MSTR. Look at Apple. Look at all these other stocks. They certainly devalue and manipulate the stockholders. They dilute them all the time. Sometimes it's a good thing for the stockholders and they agree that they should go that direction. I mean, MSTR has certainly convinced their stockholders of that. Sometimes it's not. But the idea that our US government is going to invest taxpayer money into these types of assets and they don't have any sort of control over the manipulation, that's the concern I have. I don't think it's a national security risk, obviously, unless you invest way too much money, which I don't think we're going to do. But I do think it's a national security risk not to have any Bitcoin. And so that's why I'm going to continue to fight to make sure that Bitcoin is a cornerstone of that reserve. And hopefully maybe one day we wake up and maybe we get an EO that says, let's create a crypto strategic reserve. And then Senator Lummis comes back around with her legislation and is able to pull that Bitcoin out and put it into its own siloed strategic Bitcoin reserve.
I want to get into the question of when, and then also loop in kind of the main theme of this, which is obviously the states buying Bitcoin. Cynthia Lummis telling the news, making her rounds, I believe, on Fox News last week, claiming she thinks the states are going to beat the federal government to buying Bitcoin. I know you've said you're bullish on Utah being the first U.S. state to put Bitcoin on the balance sheet, maybe as soon as this March. So how does Trump's announcement shake this up? Do you think that states will beat Donald Trump to buying Bitcoin and putting it on the balance sheet?
I absolutely do. There's a number of different states that are well positioned to be able to get this across the finish line, but nothing is a guarantee. You know, we were very optimistic about Utah. It's down to the wire now. We'll see what happens. They're in the last vote. They've got to get it through the Senate before the end of the week. Texas is looking good. The end of this week, they have to have the vote in the Senate in Utah. So they're making that. They're getting ready to make the decision on when to have the vote and trying to get the senators on board. And then you also have Oklahoma, which looks good. You're going to have some great legislation moving forward there in the House here shortly. And then you also have North Carolina, which looks really good. Our good friend Dan Spuller out there leading the charge. Iowa is also a great possibility as a target state. And as I said, Texas just a moment ago is well positioned politically to get it done. Yes, the Trump tweet helps, especially in these red states. To what degree, hard to measure, but it does create a pathway for lawmakers and treasurers to get on board because they know that the person at the very top of their party and the top of the country has their back on this idea as well.
Well, maybe we could dive into Utah because that I think is the big question. That's been something that people want to know. Is it going to happen? What are the actual dynamics of what's going on? So it sounds like you're saying this week it'll be decided. What are the remaining questions that people have? How are the political parties aligning? Is it bipartisan? Are you optimistic? Love your thoughts.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, it's coming down to the wire. We've done everything we can to put it into a good position, and it's really going to be up to the Senate president, and the treasurer if they believe that this is the right direction to take or not. We think it's about a 50-50 right now. We were very optimistic about the state, and we've gotten it into the position to where it can pull the lever and be the first to, in the entire country, get this legislation across the finish line. Certainly, every time you have a brand new piece of policy like this, it's always going to have some consternation. I mean, the vote in the House was close. It was 38-34. Then in the Senate committee, it was a tight vote. So in the Senate floor, it's also going to be a tight vote. And it's hard to know one way or the other which direction it's going to go. It really is going to come down to the wire. And that's why we'd encourage anybody in the state of Utah that wants to see this thing get across the finish line to please reach out to your lawmakers and let them know that you support this type of legislation.
Well, what kind of things are being debated at this point in the bill, right? So it was introduced earlier in the session. I assume critics have kind of had their voice. Like, are there particular issues that you think would stop Utah from buying Bitcoin at this point, or it's just this is the nature of legislation?
It is purely down to the comfortability of the lawmakers. I believe that the legislation was written the appropriate way. You know, there are always going to be arguments over, you know, how much should it be 5%, 10%, which fund should it go into? I don't really believe that there is a serious debate that needs to be had. I think it's just a matter of comfortability of which, you know, funds they want it to go towards. And we work with every lawmaker, and we try to work with the treasurers as well every time to get their input on what they believe is the right direction. We think the bill is written well. We think the bill is written the right way to get across the finish line, but it's going to come down to the comfortability of the folks like the treasurer and the Senate president and the folks in the Senate on where they think this one, whether or not they think it's a good idea, right? Because obviously the bill sponsor, Senator Colomore, who is the majority there, the majority leader, he thinks it's a great idea. He's got a lot of political power, but there are always other forces at play when it comes to getting legislation across the finish line. We're very optimistic, but it's going to be another tight vote. So if that is something that people want to see get across the finish line, I don't know when this episode is going to come out. Obviously, if it needs to come out before Friday in order to make a difference. But if they want to see something change, I would highly encourage them to reach out to the treasurer's office and to the Senate president, as well as if you're a constituent, you know, reaching out to your lawmaker as well, that's a senator, and let them know that you support this legislation.
Do you see Utah being a bellwether here? You know, there's been, I think, a lot of community sentiment. Of course, I've been tweeting pretty actively about the U.S. states that are, you know, looking to put Bitcoin on the balance sheet. Obviously, it's a historic race. Utah really has become the front runner and has become associated with this, I think, within the Bitcoin community. You know, if the Utah vote doesn't pass, or if it does pass, like, how do you think that changes the trajectory for the entirety of these 30 bills?
It will make a big difference. Absolutely. The momentum that we've been able to generate off of Utah has been instrumental. Just like the momentum that we generated off of Pennsylvania by it being the very first state to introduce strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation at the state level. And if we want to capture that momentum, we can with a passage of the bill in Utah and continue the momentum. I still believe, regardless of whether or not Utah passes this bill into law, we will see other states go on to pass it into law. There are independent political movements taking place in each of these states, and there are different forces at play in each of these states. Now, if Utah were to pass it, not only would it help provide additional political momentum to the current states that are looking to get it done, but the ones that are more on the fence, I think that's where it makes a big difference. The ones that are on the fence that I don't feel have the political momentum currently could generate significant political momentum from this type of concept getting across the finish line in a state like Utah so early in the process.
Of the ones, a little bit of back and forth at the top of this episode, I did mention that there were a few bills that have failed to pass so far. Have we learned anything from those? Are there lessons learned that can be applied to something like Utah or Texas or North Carolina going forward? What do you make of those failures, or those just, tablings in some cases, like in the case of New Mexico?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Every process, every policy, I should say every legislative cycle is a educational process, not only for lawmakers, but for us at Satoshi Action and for other groups that are working as well. Probably the most obvious one would be in Wyoming. It was a little bit of a matter of miscoordination because everyone, oh, wow, the bill failed in Wyoming, Senator Lummis's home state. Clearly this idea is not as sold as we thought it was. The problem that happened in Wyoming was that there wasn't a group that really got behind the bill. We could have theoretically gotten behind the bill in a big way, but, it's the state of Wyoming. And we just kind of thought, we're so busy in so many other states that Wyoming has been such a leader. They probably don't really need our help because they've consistently been able to get these things across the finish line without our help. They've done amazing work. The problem with an idea like strategic Bitcoin reserve, though, is it is such a new idea. And now for the first time ever, you're talking about intertwining the funds that are held by the states with Bitcoin. And for a lot of lawmakers, they've just really never been presented with this idea. And so if you don't have a group like us, or there's other groups as well on the ground in some of these states pushing this legislation across the finish line, if you don't have a group behind it, getting ready to get in the trenches, educate lawmakers on why it's important, because it's easy to get a bill sponsored. I wouldn't say easy. It's relatively, as you can see, relatively easy to 24 states, almost 25 states now. Actually, it is 25 states now that have some type of strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation that they're reviewing. Half the country is looking at this stuff. So you can get a lawmaker in at least half the country. That's pretty good odds. But convincing the rest of the legislature and a treasurer who's critical to be on board with this legislation, that's a totally different ballgame. And if you don't have a group like Satoshi Action or another type of group, nonprofit, NGO, you name it, getting behind it, it is very difficult to push because these states, a lot of these state lawmakers, they are running on massive budget deficits. They have shortfalls. Some of them have a lot of money too, but they don't tend to fund their state lawmakers enough. They don't tend to give them enough staff. So in order for these things to get moved forward, you really need a group to come alongside that lawmaker who wants to get it done and say, you know what, we're going to charge forward with you. We're going to get it across the finish line together. We'll provide the one pagers. We'll do the research. I mean, there is an incredible amount of work that goes into getting this stuff even viable. We have done academic paper after academic paper. We have also done studies to show how important it is that lawmakers look at this in a realistic way. We've done resolutions in the past. We're meeting with treasurers for well over a year now. Everybody's jumping in right now. We have been meeting with these treasurers for a long time, providing that comfortability. We have been doing resolutions to have states look into studying Bitcoin for the purpose of buying in the pensions. We have been doing one-on-one meetings, driving advocacy campaigns. We helped over 200,000 people write letters to their lawmakers at the state level, advocating for this type of idea. It's an insane amount of work that goes into just having a shot to get this across the finish line. So if you don't have that, I mean, the odds of passing it are basically zero. And in the state of Wyoming, unfortunately, we assumed there would be a group that would get behind it or an effort, and it just didn't materialize. So next year, we'll definitely be back. If they want us to help them there, we're happy to help. We don't want to step on their toes. But if they want to see us help them, we're more than happy to get into the fight. So we certainly learn a lot every single time. When we first started in June of 2022, FTX had just collapsed. Lawmakers were like, what are we even going to, isn't Bitcoin dead? And we barely even knew what we were doing. We knew enough to get 2 bills passed into law, but it was very, very, very watered down. I wouldn't say watered down is probably not the right word, but it was just much less significant than a strategic Bitcoin reserve bill. This is a much more cutting edge piece of policy, much more difficult. But the work that we've done over the last 2 years, the training, the education that we have taken in and that we have delivered has put us in a position to pursue this type of policy. Hopefully we get it across the state in Utah, but there are other options for us as well to fall back on to get that first state.
Let's talk about the reactions from lawmakers. You mentioned a few times there, just the education process. Are there any interesting anecdotes or stories from when you first presented these bills, the reactions you got, to maybe the more sophisticated reactions that you're seeing now? Now that some of these bills have spent, as you said, maybe a few months in the process of being considered, have you seen lawmakers make a journey towards education? What has that been like?
Oh, absolutely. I mentioned earlier, June of 2022, we launched. You could barely get a phone call with lawmakers to talk to them about Bitcoin. it was very difficult. Luckily, in a way, there is one benefit of the shutdowns that we had from COVID. It's that every lawmaker in the world had to learn how to use Zoom. So that was good, really helpful, because most lawmakers before then, I'll tell you, they wouldn't even meet you unless you were in the state. So you had to fly there every single time. So we were able to scale our communications really rapidly and actually get these phone calls to happen without having to be, forced to go fly to every single state. And then on a nonprofit, on a shoestring budget, that was really, really important to our success, was the ability for these lawmakers and the willingness to jump on these phone calls because they had become very accustomed to it. So we find, I think it was 7 states that we introduced policy in the first legislative cycle in 2023, very beginning of 2023. And we ultimately passed 2 bills into law, but it was just protecting the ability for minors to operate. That's it. That time back then was hard to get a call. Now, if you fast forward to where we are today, lawmakers are calling us. They're sliding into my DMs. They're emailing us. They are taking our models off of our website, not even communicating with us and just introducing them. We don't even have to talk to them. It's an emergent behavior that has started to occur. And this is what we had planned from the very beginning. I don't think I really believed that it would happen this quickly. When I first started Satoshi Action, I really honestly just started it because I was worried about the direction that we were headed as a country. And I didn't see anybody getting into the fight and doing it the way I thought it needed to be done. We needed a grassroots advocacy group that could move across the country and push agendas and push policy across the finish line, educate lawmakers en masse, and drive policy wins across the finish line. We were always on our back foot, always playing defense, and we wanted to go on offense for Bitcoin. We did that successfully, and wow, things have really changed, not just because of our work. There are many other groups in the space that are making a meaningful impact, but I launched Satoshi Action because I really just didn't see anyone doing what we were doing. And I thought what we were doing is so important. And now we're in this incredible position to be able to have conversations with not only state lawmakers, state treasurers, but also we're working on some stuff on the federal side as well. Now we've been able to, because of our work, obviously people are paying attention and they're saying, wow, look at all this great stuff that's happening at the state level. Maybe we need to be working with Satoshi Action on some of this federal work as well. So we've been very fortunate to be put in that position. And yes, it's changed dramatically. And now lawmakers are more than ever willing to learn about Bitcoin, not just Republicans, but also Democrats as well.
The only thing better than stacking sats is staking them. With Core's self-custodial Bitcoin staking, you can earn yield on your BTC without ever giving up custody, no new trust assumptions, no counterparties, and no slashing risk. Still your keys, still your coins, now your yield. Here's how it works. Lock your Bitcoin on the Bitcoin network. Help elect a Core validator and start earning Core rewards, passively, securely, and without risk to your principal. And with dual staking, you can boost rewards by staking Core tokens alongside your Bitcoin. Institutions can also tap into Bitcoin at scale with top custodians. Don't let your Bitcoin sit idle, put it to work. Visit stake.core.dao/blockworks to start staking today. For the past decade, Ledger has been the global leader in digital asset security, trusted to secure more than 20% of the world's crypto assets. Celebrating 10 years of innovation, Ledger is making digital ownership more secure and accessible with their latest products, Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex. These wallets feature the world's first secure touchscreens, simplifying your digital transactions while ensuring uncompromising security through Ledger's secure chip and proprietary OS. Plus, with the Ledger Security Key app, you can say goodbye to traditional passwords and step up your digital protection. Ready to protect your assets? Choose the most trusted name in hardware wallets, Ledger, and take control of your digital security today at ledger.com. If you've been around Bitcoin for long enough, you've heard the term HODL and the name Ledn. Ledn has been the go-to specialist in Bitcoin lending for over 6 years. Ledn helps you unlock the liquidity of your BTC, allowing you to HODL while still accessing the wealth of your Bitcoin. Ledn has been battle-tested with a focus on transparency, security, and trust. This has allowed them to build a proven track record of client success and security, helping tens of thousands of clients harness the value of their digital assets with confidence and peace of mind. Learn for yourself why so many clients trust Ledn by checking out Ledn's Trustpilot or their reviews on social media. And to learn more about what your Bitcoin can do for you, check out ledn.io.
Well, the watershed moment, I think, for many people just observing in the industry was over 25 states. There's only 50 states in the United States, in the union. These bills have been introduced in over 30 states. What do you make of that? Does it really say something about Bitcoin kind of as an idea, or the idea of saving in Bitcoin and keeping it as a reserve asset? Has it hit some threshold? Is there something to be said about the fact that the majority of U.S. states are at least considering this proposal.
Absolutely. It's just a sign of how quickly things have changed. The Overton window has totally shifted, and it's continuing to shift and continuing to go the right direction. And we now have 33 states with some type of pro Bitcoin or digital asset policy. And there's going to be more. There's more coming. We're in conversations with states that aren't on the map yet, and some big ones too. So very excited about how far we've come. But at the end of the day, at the end of everything, when it comes to our work and all of these things that you're seeing, all this orange on the map, the only way the orange stays on the map is if they pass the bill into law. If they don't pass the bill into law, I wouldn't say it was for nothing, because we'll be back the next year, but that's the only thing that really matters. The only thing that really matters is you got to get this legislation across the finish line. You absolutely have to score these wins. And that's the message we've been sharing from the very beginning. But the beautiful thing about the states is you get 50 bites of the apple. You have 50 chances to score. In Washington, D.C., you only get one opportunity, and usually it only comes every 10 years. So that's sort of why we've spent a little less time in D.C., and also there's a lot of other great groups doing work there on the ground. But this is why the states are so important, because you can have so many chances to get things across the finish line, but that is the only thing that matters. Because in 5 to 10 years, the political winds could completely shift. We could see another hostile administration come through that wants to bash us all over the heads and make us think about the need to go do our business elsewhere in the world. And the only thing that's going to protect us is if we pass policy into law to protect this industry and to create regulatory frameworks that will stand the test of time.
Blue, red, orange, you mentioned it. This is a Republican issue, or seen as a Republican issue, because of Trump's association with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. At the state level, are you seeing bipartisanship emerge, or are you seeing the Republicans in that environment?
Absolutely. I mean, just look at the state. There's a lot of, obviously we're working in a lot of red states, but we work in blue states as well. We saw Massachusetts. I'll start with the Democrat sponsors. Massachusetts, 2 Democrats introduced strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation, one in the House, one in the Senate. We also saw in the state of Oregon, Representative Nose introduce a Bitcoin rights bill to protect the right to self-custody and a few other items. We will see another big bill from a Democrat coming from another deep blue state here shortly that will protect digital asset rights, Bitcoin rights. But on the states where you have Republicans leading and they're pushing legislation forward, we've seen unanimous votes. And don't assume because it's a red state that the blue lawmakers in the red state are like not very liberal or not very Democrat. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they tend to bend further to the right than, like, let's say, Democrats in a blue state. But Democrats in a red state are voting in favor of this legislation. In the state of Kentucky, we just had a 91-0 unanimous vote. There are Democrats in that state. We've had other legislation that has received unanimous votes in committee and on the floor, and Democrats have voted in favor of that. So the big thing right now is the Democrat Party is going through a massive restructure, huge restructure. It's much different than when this all happened in 2016. We didn't see this level of restructure take place. The Democrat Party is, in a way, in total rebuild mode. Like a sports team. Sports team gets down to the bottom of the bracket. They're one of the teams that aren't winning anymore. They, instead of trying to focus on winning next year, they go through this process of saying, we're going to take a longer term approach, and we are going to figure out what we're doing wrong, and we're going to fix it. We're going to take it seriously. That process is happening right now in the Democrat Party, very early in that process. But the benefit of that is the entire party is figuring out where it wants to go. And so you have this opportunity as individual lawmakers in the country to go the right direction that you think you need to go on Bitcoin, because you're not having to worry about what the party's going to say to you. You also don't have to worry about what the administration is going to say to you, because there's no Democrats in power right now. Typically, when you have whoever the president is, they're the de facto leader of the party. So when Biden was president, he's a de facto leader of the Democrats. And also, everybody that's in his inner circle is very much controlling what happens in the Democrat Party. Well, during his administration, I don't think it was really his idea. I think it was more of a Warren thing. But during his administration, the de facto leader of the party was pushing and allowing for the suppression broadly, writ large, of Bitcoin and digital assets. So lawmakers that are state lawmakers and federal lawmakers that are Democrats have to be a little bit more careful. They cannot overstep the president. They don't want to be in conflict with the president and the leader of the party, generally speaking. Sometimes they will, but generally speaking, that's most lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. Look at the Trump administration. Very few Republicans are willing to challenge Trump and the Trump administration, even probably more so than during this last Biden presidential administration. But now that there's no Biden, there's no Democrat in the White House right now, and that the Democrat Party is rebuilding in rebuild mode, there's a huge opportunity for these individual lawmakers to say, you know what, actually, I am in favor of Bitcoin. I do want to see stablecoin legislation, market structure, strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation. I don't think we're going to see that broadly right away, but this is a process where we truly start to find our Bitcoin champion on the Democrat side of the aisle, not only at the state level, but at the federal level as well.
Looking ahead post-Biden, I know this was a conversation in Nashville, speaking of the Bitcoin conference. The narrative was very much that the Republicans were shifting towards a Bitcoin-only or Bitcoin-first approach, and that it was the Democrats who were kind of broadly crypto-focused, sort of, old alliances with Silicon Valley from the time of Obama's presidency. So as we look to this post-Biden Democratic Party, do we have a sense of what their Bitcoin or crypto strategy should be? If you were talking to Elizabeth Warren, what's the opportunity that you would say is on the table, given this change that we've seen from Trump?
Absolutely. There's a huge opportunity, in fact, for Democrats. Not only do they have this restructuring that's taking place, and so there's an opening, there's a void that needs to be filled, and there's a little ability for these individual lawmakers to figure out what they want to believe on Bitcoin and digital assets. But Trump has also opened up an additional door because he has been so unrestricted in his support of everything crypto, everything from Bitcoin to him launching his own meme coin. And because he has been so...
The meme coin bill even put forward, right, to kind of restrict some of the president and lawmakers from getting active in the market, right?
Yeah, that was a natural, of course, that we said that was that's going to happen at the state level as well. So we're already aware of those efforts taking place at the state level. So I'm not surprised that bill came from Democrats in the House. I'm actually surprised it took this long to an extent. But the reason why that's so important, his unrestricted support and unlimited sort of free market for crypto, is it gives Democrats the ability to create a position that is in opposition to some parts of that space. So you have the ability, in my opinion, for Democrats to become very pro-Bitcoin, very pro-stablecoin, maybe a few other items, but then to become very against in an opposition to the worst parts of this industry. And I won't go around sort of naming names on who the worst parts of the industry are, but I think we can all agree that folks that are running for office, they should be very careful about the way that they are using this market to benefit themselves in public office. I think that's a concern that a lot of people have had. And I think it's a concern that Democrats can now get behind and let that frustration be something that they will give a voice to. That would be the smartest play for Democrats right now. I have for a long time, in fact, many years, despite being told by many Bitcoiners that I was wrong, have said that I actually believe that Democrats will be more likely to be more pro-Bitcoin than Republicans, writ large. I think Republicans will be the party of minimal regulation, defaulting to one side. Democrats will be on the opposite side, fighting for always a little bit too much regulation. But I think if they can find the proper balance, they can be the party that will actually galvanize the majority of this space into a single party. But the reason why Democrats are really going to be favorable to Bitcoin versus many Republicans, maybe not Senator Lummis, right? Of course, Senator Lummis is out there being the super champion for Bitcoin on the Republican side. But the reason why you'll have a lot of Democrats that are really interested in this technology is because it's a bottom-up technology that is completely decentralized. There's no VC, hedge fund, or executive board profiteering off of the people beneath of them. It's 100% bottom-up. The people control it. The users are in control, and they can control their destiny. That's very uncommon. Even if you go to Apple stock, you buy Apple stock, they can dilute their shareholders at any given time if they have a majority. That just simply cannot happen in Bitcoin. The ability to be able to dilute the Bitcoiners is virtually off the table. Theoretically, people may say that there is an argument that it could happen. I think that's like saying that the Earth could fall into the sun, right? Like, sure, yeah, one day that could happen. But if it does, I think much worse things are probably going on that we could not predict, including the loss of orbit around the sun. So I do think that Democrats will find that very appealing. They will also find it very appealing that Bitcoin is a tool to be able to bank the unbanked and provide financial services for people all over the world who have been left behind. There are billions of people today who currently do not have access to a bank account or who don't have access to stable currencies to put into that bank account. And we're missing out on just so much human potential. Every year, every 100 years, we're seeing billions of people live and die and never achieve their full potential. If you have Bitcoin come in, you can change that dynamic. And what I commonly say to people is, we could have the next Einstein in one of these countries where they don't have banking access, where they don't have access to a traditional currency. We could have the next great thinker that could be coming from one of these places, but we will never know because they were never able to buy their first textbook. They were never able to get on the internet and start communicating with people their ideas. But Bitcoin changes that entire dynamic by, for the first time ever, allowing billions of people to have the potential to participate in the global economy for the first time ever. And that's something that Democrats care a lot about, along with consumer protections. So I do think that Bitcoin, in a way, helps to enable Democrats to push that forward, especially on the consumer protection angle. Like, think about it this way. Bitcoin is the most tightly regulated monetary asset in the entire world. People don't believe me. It's extremely regulated, almost over-regulated. And people actually made this argument during the block size wars. They said that the blocks are over-regulated. It's too tight. It's too controlled. We should loosen the regulation. We should change the policy. The Bitcoin maxis, the most extreme Bitcoin maxis, were actually in favor of the most extreme form of regulation because it protected decentralization and it protects the ability for users to know that they're in power. Same thing with the supply cap. The supply cap is hyper-regulated. It's the most regulated supply cap in monetary history. Now, of course, we've seen copycats since the invention of Bitcoin, but you can't change the supply cap. That's a form of regulation. So Democrats, again, this will appeal to Democrats. Republicans love sound money. They love the reduction of the government. They want to see more fiscal conservatism. That's great. I don't think Democrats are opposed to any of that necessarily. But the thing that will appeal to Democrats is really the inner core and inner workings of Bitcoin and what fundamentally makes it so different than the rest of the crypto industry. And also why Bitcoin firmly belongs in a strategic Bitcoin reserve, whereas it's a question mark, a big question mark for everything else.
You mentioned a word there in that description there, stable coins, obviously the discussion in Congress now. Are you seeing that on the state level? What do the states make of the stablecoin bills? I mean, obviously this would in some ways expand federal power or, move federal power in to money in a different way. Is there skepticism? Is there excitement? What are you seeing on the state level?
Definitely, we're favorable. I think there still needs to be a lot of debate and negotiations that will take place over the current legislation. You've got the Genius Act in the Senate. You got the Stable Act in the House. There's bipartisan support for the Genius Act in the Senate, and I do believe that will probably be the one that makes it the core of all of the language. Obviously, you've got technically 3 bills. You've also got one by Maxine Waters in the House, and you'll have some degree of a little bit of each in the final product. But there's going to be a lot of debates that are taking place. I mean, that is really, everybody is like hyper focused on stablecoin legislation, getting it across the finish line, mostly because it's the most reasonable policy to push forward. All of those, at least the Genius Act, I need to look further into the Stable Act, but the Genius Act enables for states to also participate and for there to be the ability for them for smaller groups to come in. So up to $10 billion, they can be outside the federal regulatory system. I believe that that's all, well and done. And I do think that we will see a stablecoin legislation pass into law before the August recess. And I do want to see states be able to participate in this ecosystem as well. I'm a very big fan of the dual banking system. We have to ensure that we continue to protect that dual banking system, which has been intact for 150 plus years, and enables there to be state regulators as well as federal regulators, ultimately ensuring that there's competition over who your regulator is. Because if you're a bank and you launch, you can choose, do you want to be state regulated or do you want to be regulated by the OCC? Do you want to have FDIC insurance or not? You could pick something different. You could be fully reserve backed. That's what Caitlin Long was trying to do. I think it's good to have optionality in how these banks are regulated, because that drives better outcomes for consumers and the users of those products. And I think there will be a level of resurgence of state banking over the next 10 years, 15 years, due to the advent of stablecoins and various other products that are coming into the space. But after that, we have market structure. And I think the market structure bill is going to be I'm pretty convinced that at this point, maybe I'm wrong, that stablecoin legislation will pass on its own, get done, because it's just, there's a lot of agreement there from Republicans and from Democrats on moving it forward. Market structure, though, is going to be the next really big piece of agenda, the big agenda on the Trump agenda for crypto policy, as well as in the Senate. It's a big part of their agenda, and the industry really wants to see it get done. And I think it'll be good because when you're able to actually implement broad regulations around an industry, you see a massive amount of investment come in. Similarly to when the 1996 Telecommunications Act was passed into law, that was something that regulated and sort of re-regulated various parts of the telecommunications industry around wireless, broadband, you name it. When they passed it into law, like go look at the charts, it's like you just see all this investment dump into that space. So if you do the regulations, because you got to do them the right way, if you do them the right way and you're able to get them implemented, we will see a massive amount of investment come into this space because there's going to be a lot of clarity. Investors love clarity. And right now, there's not enough clarity. I think we're headed towards a world of clarity. That's why we've seen an increase in the price, because people are believing that we will see that world play out. But there's still not clarity over whether you're a security, whether you're a commodity, until this legislation gets passed. And once it does, I personally believe that's when we're going to see an absolute waterfall of money pour into this space, especially within the United States. And then hopefully in that bill, we're able to include other components that are important to Bitcoiners. I would love to see some type of strategic Bitcoin reserve or digital asset stockpile get implemented through that piece. But more than likely, Senator Lummis's bill will be a third and separate conversation that will take place, whether or not they do a stockpile in that larger crypto bill. But you'll see Senator Lummis's strategic Bitcoin reserve bill hopefully move forward, as long as also Trump doesn't try to steal the thunder, so to speak, with his current legislation.
Well, then I just want to wind it kind of down here as we head towards the end. Want to bring it back to the beginning, talk a little bit about Bitcoin rights. This was obviously something that was super important to Satoshi Action Fund getting started, and there's a lot of federal government support now for the industry. Why is it important to still back these kind of Bitcoin rights initiatives? Why do we need to solidify this into law now? And do you want to galvanize people towards giving those bills more of an emphasis now, even in this environment where things are friendly?
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, when you have a friendly environment, that's when you need to full court press, try to get as many points scored as possible, because you don't know when things are going to turn back the other direction. And you don't know how far you're going to be able to go until you run into resistance again. So, take cannabis for an example, right? Cannabis has run really quickly the right direction for their issue. Certainly I'm pro cannabis. I don't know where everyone stands, but let's just take it as a standalone, like their own success, caring about their own success. They have done a great job of moving across the state level. They've gotten into 75+% of the states, but they're still that last 25%. Now they know where their true targets are to potentially get to 100%. But also they've still been waiting on federal policy, and I think a lot of the momentum has really slowed down for them, partly because I think people have moved their concern to other parts of the policy arena. And right now we have so much attention, so much interest, not only from Bitcoiners, but just really the whole crypto industry on seeing these things move forward. And so we need to just diligently, right? We don't want to do it messy, diligently move through, but also quickly move through and thoughtfully move through as many of these pieces of policy as possible, and as many states as possible, and federal as well. And on the Bitcoin rights component, protecting the right to self-custody, protecting the right to run a node, protecting the right to be able to participate in Bitcoin mining, being able to participate in peer-to-peer transactions. These are all what I would call critical functions of the Bitcoin network. Like if you can't run a node and you can't mine, like Bitcoin doesn't work. And we want to make sure as many Americans as possible can participate in that. We've protected millions of Americans in their rights to be able to access this type of technology. And it also helps us to generate conversations and education at the state level. So when we go in, let's say in the state of Oregon, I've been able to meet with every committee member on the committee for the bill that it was referenced to, and have great conversations with them about why this legislation should move forward. And even if the bill never passes, let's say it's a long shot and it doesn't move at all, I have now been able to have conversations about Bitcoin with many lawmakers, and even more than the folks that are on the committee. And in some cases, I've been able to get important conversations around why Bitcoin matters with some people that are very far left in the state. And that has really influenced my ability to talk about Bitcoin with Democrats, because I've been able to have one-on-one, face-to-face conversations with some of the people in the Bitcoin space, it's very like libertarian sort of right on the internet right now, even though there's been studies to show that a lot of people on the left and the far left are buying Bitcoin in sometimes greater amounts than those on the far right. But the internet is very like, it's like everybody thinks that all Bitcoiners are like MAGA people, which is totally not true. But when I'm talking to these super far left lawmakers in my home state, it's very interesting. It's very telling because they tend to say, why don't we just do Bitcoin only? Why are we doing all this other stuff? And that has been a really insightful event that has enabled me to have bigger and better and broader conversations. And so even if we don't ever pass it, there are huge things that come out of just these conversations alone. But of course, like I said, at the end of the day, the most important thing is passing policy into law and protecting those rights. And so we will continue to fight for that. And regardless of what Washington and DC does, they might do nothing. Who knows? It's all talk right now. Certainly, Trump has done his EOs to get some good stuff going, but policy hasn't gotten done. And there's a lot of infighting in the space. That's why they canceled that. Remember, they were going to do an industry crypto council, and Trump was like, "Yeah, I don't think so." And I think Eleanor reported and said there was like so much infighting in the crypto industry to get these spots that they just canceled the whole thing. That infighting could cause us to wait another 4 years or another 10 years. We don't know. Hopefully not, but it could. And if it does, we got to be making sure that we're continuing to make progress. And the best way to do that is at the state level. And I want to do it with Bitcoin rights, and I want to do it with strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation. So that's why it matters, not only for education, but ensuring that no matter what happens in Washington, D.C., we are seeing policy move forward and get passed into law.
Dennis, it was great having you on here. Appreciate you coming on. Satoshi Action Fund. Appreciate all the work you do. Want to just nail it down, kind of a final thought here, talking about the U.S. government versus the states. Do the states win? Do the states buy Bitcoin first? Your quick thoughts before we head out.
If I had to guess, yes, but we'll see on March 7th.
You're on Poly Market. You're putting your Bitcoin down right now.
I don't bet. I am not a gambling man anymore. I used to love to do a little gambling when I was young, but I don't gamble on my Bitcoin, never. It's just really going to come down to Trump and whether or not he decides to push something forward through an EO. If it's legislation, it's not going to happen before the states. It's just not possible. The legislative process in Congress is too slow. If it's an EO, it'll be most likely a stockpile where they're not buying anything. So does that count technically? In a way it does, certainly gives the federal government, I think, half of the win at least, right? They certainly take the lead. But when it comes to buying it, I don't think that buying it in an EO is likely. And if it does happen, it could get struck down by the courts, or Congress could intervene potentially. I mean, Congress is all Republicans, so maybe they don't. It's very, like I said, it's very unpredictable at the federal level. I still feel very confident that the states will get it done first, but nothing is a guarantee in life, as I've said at the very beginning of this conversation. So I hate to nail it down to not giving you a specific yes or no, but certainly a percentage. I would say it's 70% chance that states get it done first.
Well, we'll see. Obviously, with Utah this week, this episode will be out on Blockworks. We'll also be at the Digital Asset Summit. So by March 18th to the 20th, when we descend on New York City, I bring the Bitcoin focused conversation there. We'll at least know if there was a U.S. state that is going to buy Bitcoin. Definitely. Dennis, thanks for joining us. And again, this has been Supply Shock. Like, subscribe, and listen to the podcast. Appreciate you joining us.